Welcome to the transport seminar. It is our pleasure to introduce Donna Jodhan. She is the president and CEO of Sterling Creations in Toronto. She has a bachelor degree in commerce from Concordia. She has a diploma in management from McGill. She has a master's of business administration from McGill, and she has also she's working on a bachelor in law at University of London, UK, right now as we are talking. Donna is well known for her work and fight with the government of Canada. She fought a successful charter and challenge to ensure that the Canadian government websites are accessible. Donna Jodhan versus the government of Canada in 2012. She has served on top positions in the Disability Organization for the Blind, and she won several awards for her contribution to the disability rights movement in Canada. So if I keep going and reading it, I will take almost the entire time. Last time she came to McGill, had a full house in the room, although we were during a reading week. So Donna joining us today on the phone, and thanks for joining us. And Donna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to the students. I'm always happy to speak to any group at McGill University, and Montreal is my favorite city. I'm in the wrong city right now, but that's okay. I'll start by telling you that up until the lockdown in March, I traveled regularly and frequently across Canada for both my work and other things. And I also traveled regularly to the Caribbean and the UK, and my last trip was to Hawaii in February. I will tell you that no airport is the same. Every airport has varying degrees of accessibility. And as far as the Toronto Pearson Airport is concerned, I've had to fight extremely hard to get these guys to recognize that accessibility is really needed, is really required, not just for a person like me who is blind or vision impaired, but for people, anyone with a disability and their families and friends and associates. And it is only in June of 2018 that I finally managed to get them to agree to some major updates, upgrades, and innovations. And bless them, they've been trying their best, but with the COVID lockdown, I'm not really sure what's going on right now. As a traveler who is blind and vision impaired, before the lockdown, I think that the best way for me to have handled things would be to ensure that I was well organized. And what I mean by that is that every trip that I took was planned carefully and way ahead of time. I chose, very, very carefully, and I made darn sure that when I planned my trip, it was deliberately planned so that I would use my travel agent instead of going to the websites. The websites for most airlines were not very accessible, and getting information from the airports were quite, it was quite a task to get it done. So what I did is that I would work with my travel agent to plan each trip. The trips that were done domestically, and I will say this for the Canadian airports, they weren't too bad up until the lockdown. And there were certain airports that I favored more than others. One was the Trudeau Airport, one was the Ottawa Airport. The Vancouver Airport wasn't too bad. The Toronto Airport, until the last year or so, they have really done their best to come up to snuff. But the most accessible airport was Gatwick Airport in the United Kingdom. That airport really got it. They really understood what it was meant by accessibility, and they would treat the passengers, incoming and outgoing passengers, with respect and courtesy, and they knew exactly what was needed, what was necessary. I never had to tell them ahead of time what I needed. Now, up until the lockdown, the way things were handled, and I will stick to the Toronto airport, is that one had to do several things or go through several steps. First of all, my travel agent had to inform the airline that I was vision impaired and that I needed help. If that airline did not provide the services that I was seeking, services such as when I arrived at the terminal, so for curbside assistance, check-in at the check-in counter, and escort services to the aircraft, and on the return trip from the aircraft, through immigration, through the luggage area, and out to the terminal exit, and if I needed a cab, they would help with that way. Those were the steps I had to go through. Now, certain airlines provided what I would call end-to-end services. One was WestJet, one was Air Canada, and the other one was Air Transat. In the case of WestJet and Air Transat, they provided what I would call, meet and greet at the curbside. So if they knew that I was supposed to take one of their flights to Ottawa, Montreal, Halifax, Vancouver, no matter where it was, they would be told about this. They would communicate directly with me, and on said day and at said time, they would be out there waiting. In the case of Air Canada, it was not quite the same, and I'm going to share with you at the time, it was a very nerve-wracking experience, but you might find it a bit humorous. In the case of Air Canada, and they have all of their flights going out of Terminal 1. So I was told beforehand that I had to get to the appropriate post where there was a phone. And the phone, you had to press option 1 to call them. My friend brought me to the post. I picked up the phone, I pressed option 1, and the agent on the other end said, "Oh, we'll be out shortly." It took 3 calls before anything happened, but what I did not know at the time was that agent was not an Air Canada agent. That agent belonged to the Toronto Airport Authority. The funny part comes when, after 3 tries and nobody appeared, I chose option 2. Option 2 being to call emergency. When the guy picked up the phone at the other end, he says, "Do you know that this is the police?" And I said, "No, I'm trying to get an Air Canada agent out here to come and help me get to the check-in counter." That did it, in that he was able to contact the Air Canada folks, and within 5 minutes someone came out. I think I was too distraught to say anything or to say what the heck was going on. Anyways, it worked out fine after this, and I was able to get to the check-in counter with the Air Canada agent, and after that, everything was smooth. The services that each airline offers is very similar to what the Toronto Airport offers on behalf of those airlines that do not provide end-to-end services. So the airport, Toronto's airport, would provide services on behalf of more international airlines, and I have taken some international airlines to go to the Caribbean and to Britain. And in that case, they were pretty good. So the services consisted of meeting me at curbside, take me to the check-in counter with my luggage, and they were often quite nice about it in that they would help me with my luggage as well. They would stand there with me and, wait until I was checked in, and then we would proceed to I would either sit in the business lounge because most times I traveled business class, or when I didn't, they would take me straight to the gate and they would make sure that I would board the aircraft. On the aircraft itself, the staff or the hostesses and hosts were responsible for helping me out. So if I wanted anything, they were very short in, that I would have assistance to the washroom, that I would get my meals or my snacks or whatever it is. But when I landed in a foreign country, that's where, the assistance would end as far as the Canadian side of things were concerned, because they were not responsible for services upon arrival in a foreign country, right? So that was the type of environment that I was dealing with before lockdown. Now with lockdown and now with COVID, I have so many questions and so many concerns, and I don't know who the heck to go to because things are changing so rapidly. One day it's this and the other day it's that. So going to the Toronto Airport Authority, you don't know who to go to. Going to my travel agent, she does her best, and she does a very good job in trying to find me answers to my questions. But it's nerve-wracking because I don't know what's happening. And every airport has a different story to tell. But I haven't traveled since March, and I don't know when I'll be traveling next, hopefully sooner than later. But I have more questions and concerns. I don't have any answers. And some of the questions I have are something like this. How is social distancing going to affect the types of services that should and would be offered to me? For example, when I get to the curbside and the agent comes out to help me out, I normally, before the lockdown, would take their arm and they would walk beside me and we would go into the terminal. What happens now? How far apart am I going to be from them? Am I going to be allowed to take their arm? So those are concerns I have. And nobody right now can tell me anything. The other concern I have is if a kiosk is required for me to check in, and I normally do not use a kiosk because the kiosks at Toronto's airport are not accessible or fully accessible for a blind person. How is that assistance going to be rendered? Again, because of social distancing. How is it going to be done? So, what happens from aircraft to immigration to luggage to exiting the terminal upon arrival back at Pearson? The same thing. How is social distancing going to be dealt with? The next thing is concerning to me is the on-board assistance. Again, how are staff going to handle assisting me if I need to go to the washroom, serving me my meals? And when everyone is wearing a mask, it's so difficult to hear each other at times. What's going to happen then? And what if I need to purchase hand sanitizers or masks or anything else at the airport? Where am I going to find it, and will the staff be trained enough to help me out? So these are all concerns. These are all questions. Nowhere to go right now. I'm not sure where I'm going to go. I probably will start with the Canadian Transportation Agency. I have developed a good rapport with them, and this is where I met Ahmed a few years ago at one of their advisory groups meetings. The CTA has an advisory group on disability issues, so that's where I met him. And that's where I'm going to start because I don't know where else to go. And I cannot expect my travel agent to know everything because she herself has said to me, it's like, let's visualize this picture. you're in the ocean and waves are coming at you left, right, and center, and you don't know, or I don't know, how high to jump. And if I miss and I don't jump high enough, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to be, tumbling towards the shore. I mean, it might be a bad analogy, but this is what it is right now. It's very, very uncertain. And the thing is, it's uncertain for everybody. So if you think about the uncertainty for someone who is blind or vision impaired, it's even threefold, fourfold, because when you can't see where you're going and you're depending on people to help you out, but there are restrictions. They can't come close enough to you. We're both wearing masks. What are we going to do? Do I sanitize my hands before I take their arm if I'm allowed to take their arm? What are the regulations? And are regulations being thought of, or restrictions, or what? Who is going to develop these? We really don't know. So those are the things that I personally am concerned about, and I think a lot of other people are concerned about them. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But it's not this. It's the same, I should say, for every type of disability. For those in a wheelchair, even they have their own challenges. For those who are hard of hearing, it makes it even more difficult when they're wearing everybody's wearing a mask. So how are they going to hear properly? And what happens if there are emergencies, such as a change of gates and stuff like that? Who's going to help us out? The social distancing is the most challenging thing, I think, that is facing someone who is blind or vision impaired like myself. And after that, it's all about the masks, being able to communicate effectively. So that's how I see it right now, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Donna. Thank you so much for this. Um, I want to start by asking you a personal question related to your current travel, your local travel. How are you seeing things these days when you travel for groceries or anything like that, or someone has to bring you the stuff, or how do you deal with these things? You have to go for walks. You love to take walks. How are you dealing with COVID, with the situation right now?
It's been a big change for me. So whereas before COVID came to us, I used to go to the grocery store on my own. I would walk up the street to my grocery store. It was Metro. I would go in there, and as prearranged, the staff was waiting to help me out. They would walk around with me, and they would make sure I got what I wanted. And then when I was done, I would return to my home because I don't live far from the Metro supermarket. This has all changed. And now I have to depend on my friend to come to my home and help me out. So every week we run errands. She comes to my home. She's wearing her mask and I'm wearing mine. And we go into her car and we go to Metro. We do our social distancing. She makes sure that I am social distancing appropriately. We do our errands at the grocery, at the bank, at the pharmacy, and then she brings me home. Now, COVID has also brought this on us in that I have to spend a bit more money to get what I need to get. I cannot and will not expect anyone to do anything for free on a weekly basis. It's not fair. It's not right. So COVID has, managed to make a dent in my pocket. I have to, pay for assistance to run my errands every week. I don't take the bus. I personally don't take the bus. I'm petrified to take the bus, and I don't take the subway.
Mm-hmm. So you don't take the bus because of COVID, or generally before that?
I don't take it because of COVID. Before that, I took it when I had to take it. I didn't mind. I enjoyed taking the bus.
Okay.
I stayed away from the subway because I don't like subways. I had a very bad experience several years ago where someone tried to throw me off the platform, so I stay away from the subway.
Mhm. It's very interesting that like the amount of challenges that you start facing because of COVID that you have to bring so that someone has to take you now. You're losing big part of your independence that you had before.
That's
Like
correct, yeah.
yeah, so you lost some of your independence, which is like it's very important to keep. Let me I'll start looking at some of the questions now,
Yep,
and then I'll come back to my own questions.
sure.
I have I have several questions I want to ask you.
Okay.
Um, Someone wrote, can you talk a bit about your experience using public transport before COVID?
Most of the bus drivers were very, very nice. You know, like I would stand at the bus stop with my cane and they would stop when they saw my cane. I was able to get on the bus independently and they would make sure that I was able to sit on in the first seat right behind them or across from them. So I never really had much difficulty when using the buses. As far as the subway or the metro was concerned, like I said, I stayed away from that. I never felt quite confident enough to take it independently after my incident there. But I will say again, the public transport was pretty good. And if I can also touch on cabs, because like many times I took cabs to go to meetings and stuff like that. If I didn't know the area very well, the cab drivers were very, very good. I would say to them, I need to be picked up at my door. I have a cane. And as soon as they knew that, the driver, as soon as he got to my home, would hop out of his cab and he would come to me and escort me to the cab.
Demetrius Milakis has a question for you.
Yeah.
And he asks, are there any regulations and policies regarding virtual accessibility of services? Well, I know that
I
you had the
yeah.
fight with the Canadian government, but right now, when almost everything went online, how do you see things?
Um, some websites are more accessible than others, and there have been several lawsuits against Air Canada because their website is not very accessible. But I think they're working to improve that. A lot of the airlines are not very accessible. Like if you go to a travel agency's website or Travelocity or I just don't know the other websites off the top of my head. They're not very accessible. So this is why I choose to use my travel agent instead of trying to navigate through tons and tons of inaccessible pages.
Mhm. Okay. Caitlin Kopek is asking, if you don't mind sharing, why is that a bus has become harder to take during COVID, from your perspective?
From my perspective, the thing is with the buses now, certain seats are, like they've barred off certain seats. So like it's every other seat that you can sit in, and I feel very uncomfortable going onto a bus not knowing which seat is is allocated and which seat is not. So this is why I choose not to take it. And then again, I don't know if everybody on that bus is wearing a mask, and I feel very, very exposed if someone is not wearing a mask. I'm wearing mine. You can't really say to them, please wear your mask, and it's difficult to communicate with people while wearing a mask.
Mhm. Uh, Another question that came from Jimmy, he's asking, do you get sense that officials are aware of the additional disruptions COVID is causing for people with disabilities, and especially those who are visually impaired, or the voices are not heard?
I'm afraid our voices are not being heard. We've been trying and trying since the lockdown started to catch the attention of the appropriate people in the federal government, and our Minister of Issues with Disabilities, Carla Qualtrough, she formed a committee, a special COVID advisory committee. I think it might have been in April or May. We're still waiting to hear from them. And this is a big concern to me because, there's so many different things, not just travel alone, that we are really worried about. And I don't think anybody's really listening.
Mhm. Um, with Costa is asking, with all the layoffs that's happening in the airline industry, uh, what are your thoughts about the future would be in staffing shortages?
I think there's going to be a huge staffing shortage, and this is another thing that is of a great concern because if they're laying off so many people, how many of them will be able to return to work? And even at that, a lot of them may decide, well, you know what, I don't want to return to work in the airline industry. I want to go elsewhere. So that means that new people have to be trained. And that's going to be a problem for persons with disabilities. Is where are they going to get the training from? Are airlines willing to train them? That'll be another cost to them. So yes, I do have major concerns, and I think today in the United States they're laying off hundreds of thousands of airline staff. So I don't know what it's going to be like in Canada. We haven't heard anything about that, or if we have, I haven't. I don't know, but that is a concern.
Um, Kim is asking, can you tell us about some of your experiences with changing the accessibility regulations? Like, do you feel like some cities prioritize that issue better than others? I know we told us that you're traveling, and I was lucky to sit beside you when you traveled to Montreal. And what are the barriers that the like for new policy implementations?
I think that, like I said, I have had to fight hard against the Toronto airport, the folks at the Toronto airport, and I think it's only within the last year they finally get it. They finally understand that look at it as a cost, look at it as a benefit, right? I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think we need to work harder and to raise our voices, in a much stronger way. Don't go in there complaining. Go in there with a solution. Don't say, well, you don't have this. You go in there by saying, let's see how we can improve this, that, or the other. And I think this is the method that I would suggest for anyone to work with. But as far as regulation is concerned, I noticed that I think the Canadian Transportation Agency has been working very, very hard to bring in some sort of disability regulations, but there are a few things that have been exempted until December, and they were waiting for the passage of the Accessible Canada Act before pushing ahead. I don't really know what's going on with them right now because I guess their hands are full with complaints. So to answer the question, I don't know what types of regulations are going to come in. Like the Accessible Canada Act has been passed, but there needs to be a lot of work to follow up.
Okay. Let me ask another one. There's a lot of questions. So, someone is asking, can you talk about barrier-free Canada, work a little bit, and how you have worked with different agencies to address accessibility issues? What urban planner students should know to ensure that the future of transport is accessible from your experience?
So Barrier Free Canada, I formed Barrier Free Canada at the end of 2014. And our first mission was to ensure that because 2015 was the year of an election, we wanted to lobby the Canadian government, whichever one it was, the existing one or the incoming one, to pass legislation for an Accessible Canada Act, because Canada was one of the very few developed countries that did not have an Accessible Act. So throughout 2015 up until the election, we worked very, very hard to lobby all of the federal parties, and they were on board with us, except for one party that did not even respond. After that election, we were quite pleased that the Prime Minister and his minister decided to, be on board with us to lobby for this Accessible Canada Act. It was passed in 2019, just before the election of 2019. And there are good things in that legislation, but there are also things that are missing that hopefully we can see happen, in the coming years. Barrier Free Canada is a grassroots non-partisan. It's a grassroots organization, and we are not here to lobby for anybody or on anybody's behalf except on behalf of our own community, that being Canadians with disabilities. And what our mission is to ensure that the voices of the person on the street are heard. Because what's happening is that you have a lot of organizations, they form groups and groups and groups, and they multiply, but there is no input from the individual on the street. And this is what one of our biggest objectives is to ensure that the person on the street's voice is heard. And we're presently in the process of, updating our board. We want to make it a more inclusive board where more types of disabilities are heard from, and our members are those who represent persons with disabilities on a wider basis. So that's what we're doing right now, and we feel that this is a perfect time to do it as the minister is probably getting stuff ready to move forward with. Now that we know that an election will not be held in the fall of this year, so she's probably going to move forward with different things, and we'll be ready and waiting. We have formed a group on Facebook called the BFC Advocating for Change, and what we're doing is encouraging people to give their feedback. We have a monthly mini survey where we present 3 questions and ask people to respond to them. So this is what Barrier Free Canada is all about right now.
Sayana Sharif is asking, I'll take you a little bit away from Barrier Free Canada and the politics, and then I'll bring you back. But after I ask you this question. So she's asking about, you talked about, her question is, what are some of the assistance systems already in place that you find effective? So for me, you said you talked about the UK and how you found one of the airports very accessible. She's also asking, what would be the small things that people can do in public transit to make sure it is accessible, it's easier to use for people with disability? Last week, Chris was talking about the elevators and how they are not working. For you, what is the thing? Like, his main concern was the elevators because he's in a wheelchair.
Right. I think, one of the concerns I have is that staff are sometimes not trained enough to understand what we're asking for. And the one thing I would recommend here is that what I say, one size does not fit all. Every person is unique in what they require and what they need. So that, in the sighted world, you're not the same as Jamie, right? You have a different requirement. He does have a different requirement. That's the one thing that I would start with. Make sure that the staff is well trained to understand. You need more, probably more braille labels on elevators inside elevators, like on the buttons. You make sure that the doors are well painted, that they stand out for those with low vision. You make sure that things are well labeled. I could go on and on, but there are certain things that need to be put in place to make things more accessible to those with disabilities. Countertops need to be reachable if you're in a wheelchair. Enough space for walkers and canes and wheelchairs. Enough facilities for those with guide dogs, because that's very important, right? And to be able to use updated technology. Now we got to remember here that whereas they're talking about a piece of technology called IRA, I-R-A, that a lot of airports are now using, so that when you enter the airport, you can use your iPhone to help you find what you're looking for. The one thing I find that authorities are not taking into consideration is that a lot of people don't have iPhones. They can't afford it, let alone get the training to learn how to use it. So I don't think they should put all of their eggs in one basket. They still have to provide face-to-face services, and in addition to the other types of services, which I call technically oriented services, where you can use your iPhone to get where you want to go.
Fiona is asking a question: are there any other regular, like regional regulations for that governs the body that ensures uptake of adaptive technology for people with disabilities in airport globally, like the IATA or Star Alliance or something like that? Or nothing is like, it depends on each agency, they take their own decision what they want to do?
It might depend on what each agency wants to do. I know there is a movement towards trying to get agencies like IATA to be more active in helping out here. But, like as you see across Canada, each airport is different in the way they handle accessibility. So if that's the case with each airport across the country, let's just imagine what it's like for international travel or anything else. And in Canada, when you have different levels of government, provincially and federally, and let's remember that the Accessible Canada Act does not govern the provinces. It only governs federally mandated organizations and agencies.
One of the things that I mentioned in a meeting before about the difference between like how the differences between the provinces, even when you travel across Canada. So if we look locally in Canada, and I know you have traveled from east to west Canada, which provinces do you think are actually careful or trying to move forward the most in their disability acts? I know we are too far from the American with Disability Act, but which ones are trying to there?
I think you'd be shocked to hear my answer. I think the provinces that I think that are most, thinking in the way they look at accessibility and how they're trying to do things are Quebec and Nova Scotia. Okay? That's my feeling. I just think that these two provinces seem to have a better handle on how things are going. Here in Ontario, we have our challenges, and this is just off topic for a little bit, but I will share with you this. Because of COVID, there is a growing concern amongst persons with disabilities in Ontario in that if the healthcare system gets overrun and doctors are faced with having to make a decision as to who lives and who is, is not taken care of right away, who would it be? Would it be the younger person who is healthy, or would it be a person with a disability who is older? And this is a growing concern among our community. And we're asking the Premier to please tell us what the priority is, if there is a priority. And we are concerned. We're very, very concerned. And it's all about how persons with disabilities are being looked upon, how are we being treated, what is our value to society. And that's a bit off topic here, but it pertains to almost everything.
Yeah, Italy were facing this, like when they reached the capacity, we read some of the doctors had to face these decisions. And
Yeah.
it's a very hard situation to face that. Um, I'm surprised that you said Montreal, that Quebec is doing well. And I know you lived here for a little bit. Why is Quebec doing well? I can say, I'd like to, I would love to disagree with you, but I need to know the rationale before I disagree.
Well, I think, their programs as far as providing technology for persons with disabilities is a lot better than here in Ontario. And here in Ontario, we've cut a lot of stuff. I just think that the Quebec government seems to have a better handle. You may not think so because, I guess for those of us who live outside the province, we would see it a little differently. And you may come here and say, well, Ontario is very accessible, but I just think that Quebec seems to be, and so is Nova Scotia.
Yeah, to me, it's always the picture that I cannot forget is a guy in a wheelchair jumping on one of the escalators in Montreal, or on his wheelchair, and holding with one hand the escalator. I cannot forget this picture from my brain. Every time I use the metro, I always remember this guy. And I use his picture, I took his picture actually from the back, because it was very interesting to see how he was handling this, and how the system was not really helping him that much. I'll ask you another question. There's a lot of questions, but I'll ask you another one. Samantha Carr is asking, do you think it will be possible to standardize accessibility services offered at airport at the national level in Canada? Do you think policymakers could regulate baseline levels, that at least you have this kind of service, X or Y, or the cell phone service you're talking about?
I think the Canadian Transportation Agency has been working on that, and they've been working extremely hard to develop a Disability Rights Act for passengers or something. I don't have the exact name at hand, but that's what they've been trying to do, and I think they've done some good work. But the thing is, doing the work is one thing, enacting it is a second thing. Getting people to buy into it is a third thing. So I don't know what's going to happen now that COVID is here. How are these regulations going to be affected? What's going to happen? We normally have an annual meeting with the Canadian Transportation Agency. It's not happened for this year yet. I don't know when it will, if it will. And it will probably be a virtual meeting.
Connor is asking, and I remember from your talk in Montreal a couple of years ago when you came to visit us, about the differences between how you're treated when you fly from a Canadian airport to an American airport, and how you saw the differences. And I still remember some of that, but since many of the students didn't hear this, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. I think the treatment that I have experienced at a Canadian airport is a lot better than when you get to an American airport. But I will say that on my trip to Hawaii in February, I was very pleased with the way that I was treated when I got to Honolulu. It was very good. It was a lot different than when I traveled a few years before that. I found that the American airports just did not come up to snuff when it came to accessibility, but I guess now that, like everybody else, they are doing their best to improve.
And another thing that I remember you telling us about the idea when you go to an airport and they give you a wheelchair.
All
What's your
that.
thoughts about what are your thoughts? I remember your thoughts, but I want the students to hear it from you.
Well, this continues, and I have no idea. No matter how much you ask them, you tell them, you beg them, you plead with them, I don't need a wheelchair. I can walk. All I need to do is take your arm. Yet, on many occasions, guess what happens when you arrive at Toronto's airport? Wheelchair is waiting for you. I say, I don't need the wheelchair.
So it's still
Please.
happening.
It isn't. It's happening. It's still happening, but not as much. But you have the odd agent who says, but why? And I said, because I can walk. I don't need it. But I think they're learning. But this has been a chronic problem over the years.
Okay. Jamie is asking me, he wants to hear more about the lawsuit you had. And can you talk about it a little bit?
Well, this year,
so
November.
It's a big one. I know it's a big one, but it's good to give people to know you more.
Well, on November the 29th of this year, it'll be 10 years that we had a landmark victory on behalf of our entire community. Why did I do it? I sometimes wonder, did I really know what I was stumbling into? I didn't. All I wanted to do is to ensure that there was equal access to government websites, especially to those where, you could apply for jobs. And when I started applying for jobs in the early 2000s, it wasn't accessible. And I went my MP who got them to launch a ministerial inquiry. Nothing happened. So finally, I went to a human rights lawyer here in Toronto. David Baker was his name. And I said, I don't know what to do. Am I on the right track? And he says, you can launch a charter challenge against, against the Canadian government, a challenge to the Canadian Charter of Rights. So in 2007, we launched, before launching the application, we wrote to the minister, and she basically dismissed us by saying, thank you very much, we're dealing with it. And she did nothing. So we launched the lawsuit in 2007. It took 3 years to get to court because the government tried everything to dissuade me from, going forward. What I will remember most about before we ended up in court was that there was a specific day when I had to go and give witness statements along with my accessibility expert. There were 189 questions asked of me in 5 hours. And these guys, they weren't very nice. As they were doing their jobs. They, criticized me professionally and personally. I didn't know what I was doing. It was not nice. So finally, we ended up in court in 2010, and over a 3-day period where it was very interesting in that members of our community came out every day to court. But us, we were not witnesses. We were just there as the lawyers argued and argued. And as time went on, it was just so clear to me that the government's lawyers had no clue as to why this was being launched. They did not understand, it was to the point where one lawyer said, well, why can't you ask someone to do it? And I said, my lawyer said, she shouldn't. Just as you're able to read what's on the website, she should be able to do the same. So on November 29, 2010, the judge handed down his decision mandating the Canadian government to make its websites accessible. They then took us to the Court of Appeal, and they again lost in 2012. Since then, a lot has been done, but not enough has been done. And from what I've been told is that a lot of the software and hardware that are being used by the government is not accessible to its employees. And you still have certain departments really working very hard to ensure that employees with disabilities do get what they need, but there are others, on the other hand, who don't care. And until we could raise the conscience level of persons within the government, it's going to continue to be a very interesting struggle.
Mhm. It's a fascinating story what you have done. And then you went and studied law, and you're studying law now.
That's the other thing, and people expect that I would go into human rights law. I don't really know. I think what I'm leaning to right now is, when I'm finished, is to be able to coach others as to how to be better able to navigate the system, how to speak up for themselves. I think that's what's needed right now, and I really wish I could find some organization that would give me and my team the opportunity to develop a program where we could help others to be better able to deal with the system and to speak up and speak out.
I'll end with the last question. Have you ever used any of the Uber or ride-hailing systems?
No.
Or their systems are not accessible?
No, I don't find them accessible. Some people don't, I don't, and I just don't feel comfortable using it.
Okay. It's always fun and a pleasure to talk to you, Donna, and I still remember when I was sitting beside you in that, and I didn't know who you are, and then when you started talking, I understand. I was so impressed, and I'm still impressed. I'm proud to say I know you. So it was a pleasure to have you with us today, and thank you so much for giving us all of your time, and for the students, and to enlighten us about the situation because of COVID, and on other things that is non-COVID related as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having had me. It's a pleasure. I'm always happy to work with you, Hamid. And I will not forget the day we first met. It was very, very interesting. And anytime I can be of help, you know where to find me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always nice to have you to come and enlighten the students and enlighten me as well with your thoughts and ideas. Thank you so much. And I'll be in touch with you by email. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.